If the teacher doesn't have their key, they are locked out of the classroom. Many schools are now changing the locks on the classroom doors and taking it one step further by installing boots or door blocks in front of the door. The boot makes it nearly impossible for a shooter or intruder to knock down the door. The fire alarm that was set off from Frank's gun also caused mass confusion. On the second floor, students and staff heard the gunshots and knew to shelter in place and hide, ignoring the fire alarms. No one on the third floor heard the gunshots, so when they heard the sound of the alarm, the students and staff followed their normal fire evacuation routine, essentially making them sitting ducks in the hallway. To try and stop this from happening, schools have created better protocols to make sure that everyone is on the same page and follows the correct lockdown procedure. The only PA systems, or public address system, were located inside of the classrooms. There weren't any PA systems in the hallways or exterior areas of the school, so any alerts or announcements that needed to be made could only be heard in the classrooms, not the hallways, bathrooms, or anywhere outside. One of the main failures in the shooting was that the school didn't have an established active assailant response policy or a code red policy. Further, the school staff only had one active shooter training while the students didn't have any. This was something that needed to be addressed immediately. The school went to work establishing a written active shooter protocol, as well as conducting many training sessions for both the staff and students. This also made a lot of other schools wake up and make sure that they, too, had a protocol in place for their school. The teachers hadn't heard a code red being issued, nor did they have any sort of warning that there was an active shooter in the building. They responded to either the sound of gunfire or the fire alarms that were going off. There was also an issue with the response time for police agencies. It appears that many of the officers took their time putting on their SWAT gear. Also, while several deputies didn't respond to the sound of gunfire, other deputies ran straight into the building to seek out the shooter, provide medical care, and start evacuating people. After further research, it appears that the Broward County Sheriff Department's active shooter policy states that the officer, quote, may go into the building to seek out the shooter. The department has since undergone several different active shooter trainings, as well as rewording their protocols. City officials, school board members, county commissioners, and other politicians showed up at the command center during the school shooting, which interfered with the police agency's operations, including how they were handling the scene. This didn't help matters, and a future scene will be more secure if, heaven forbid, this tragic event were to happen again in the city of Parkland. The failures that Parkland suffered before, during, and after the shooting can only help other schools learn from their mistakes and better their training and protocols. Many of the Parkland survivors decided to take a stance on gun control and have done what they can to make sure their voices are heard through peaceful rallies, talk shows, and more. On March 9, 2018, Rick Scott, the governor of Florida at the time, signed Florida Senate Bill 7026, also known as the Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School Public Safety Act. The bill passed a few different changes into law, tightening up gun control laws and loopholes. For instance, the age to purchase a firearm was raised from 18 to 21 years old, and a 3-day waiting period for gun purchases was imposed. When someone wants to buy a firearm, they now have a 3-day waiting period between the time of purchase and the time they are allowed to take it home. Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School has recently started using an app called Fortify Florida, or Fortify FL. This is an app that allows individuals to report any suspicious or concerning behavior immediately. It will then immediately relay the information to law enforcement agencies and school officials. 3 days after the shooting on February 17, 2018, Frank was housed in the infirmary area of the jail, which is where ill inmates go for medical attention. He was housed in a single-person cell for several days. During his stay in the infirmary, corrections officers made daily observations about him in a log. They would make note that his reactions were calm and slow when he was being asked questions by the jail doctor and nurse. Another corrections officer would write that Frank was well-groomed, quiet, and would frequently be in bed, but didn't appear to ever sleep. He often spent the night tossing and turning. On February 23, 2018, Frank was moved to another unit of the jail. There were several times he asked to read the Bible, but most of the remarks from the corrections staff indicated that Frank never really sleeps. He lays in bed, stares at the wall, appearing to be in deep thought, and at times he would close his eyes, but his observers could tell that he wasn't asleep, just resting. In October of 2018, Frank began writing to a female in the United Kingdom. The letters first came to the attention of the media and public in April of 2019. Frank was writing letters, and at times love letters, to the young lady. He also was writing lessons to the girl's brother. The Europeans were just two of many online admirers of Frank's. It doesn't appear that any of the 47 pages that Frank sent to the girl between October and November made it overseas, because they were intercepted by jail staff and handed over to the prosecutor's office. The writings were very juvenile, and included various stick figures and drawings on the paper, which looked like they were done by a toddler, and were littered with spelling mistakes. The letters were filled with information that Frank liked sharing, such as political affiliations, favorite holidays, and what his future plans were. He said that he wanted to get married and have kids someday, even going as far as stating what he would name his children. All name suggestions he shared were gun references. Frank also bragged about his shooting abilities in his letters. He would explain how he was on the junior ROTC shooting team and had won a medal. He stated that his favorite holiday was the 4th of July because of the fireworks and the explosions. The only time that Frank ever mentioned the crimes he was incarcerated for was to tell his admirer that he couldn't talk about it. It would be a very bad idea. He did reference that he kind of wanted the death penalty, and to let someone, quote, inject him with long-lasting sleep. Frank even went as far as telling the girl how he wanted a girlfriend, and he urged her to come to the United States so she could watch his trial and support him. On November 14, 2018, Frank saw new charges applied, which stemmed from when he allegedly attacked a corrections officer. He was charged with 2 counts of aggravated assault on an officer, and 1 count of use of an electric or chemical weapon against a law enforcement officer. The guard asked Frank to stop dragging his sandals on the floor of the day room. A day room at the jail is just as it sounds. It's a room where inmates gather and spend the day. There are usually tables and chairs, and sometimes, depending on the jail, a television set. After the corrections officer asked Frank to follow this simple instruction, Frank gave the guard the middle finger, then all of a sudden rushed the guard and attacked his face. Frank was able to get on top of the guard and punch him many times, and then he was able to grab the guard's stun gun. It does appear that the stun gun was deployed, however, it didn't hurt the guard or Frank. After Frank was pulled off the guard, he was sent to an isolation cell, where he was away from the rest of the jail inmates. Frank was arraigned on the new charges the day after the incident, and the judge set his bail at $200,000. Since he was already sitting in jail on charges that he was denied bond for, the $200,000 bond amount for the new charges was a moot point. Before he was sent to the isolation cell, Frank was given the luxury of spending time in the day room. He was also allowed to spend several hours outside in an area by himself, away from the other inmates. But after he was charged with 3 new crimes, he spends 23 hours a day in his cell. On March 7, 2018, Frank was indicted on 17 counts of first-degree murder and 17 counts of attempted first-degree murder. Shortly thereafter, the state filed a notice of intent to seek the death penalty with the court. This is a document that gets sent to the court and the defense attorney, letting them know that the prosecutor's office would be seeking the death penalty for the defendant. Frank is currently being housed at the Broward County Jail, and the judge has denied him bail. Shortly after the shooting, visitor logs showed that Frank's younger brother visited him in jail on 2 different occasions. A family friend also took the time to visit him in jail. Frank's defense counsel has offered the state a plea deal, saying that they will plead guilty to the charges and be sentenced to 34 life sentences if they take the death penalty off the table, therefore leaving life imprisonment the worst punishment. The state did not accept this offer. There are 3 phases or steps in a death penalty case. The first is the discovery step. where all the discovery is conducted. This means both sides of the case will review all witness statements, police reports, and evidence. This is also when the attorneys file different motions and conduct different procedural court hearings. The phase is referred to as the guilt phase. This is when the actual trial takes place. Sometimes the trial can take days, weeks, or months. The state has to prove to a jury or a judge, if the shooter elects to have a bench trial beyond a reasonable doubt that a crime has occurred and the defendant had committed the crime. The third phase only happens if the judge or jury has found the defendant guilty of the crime, and this is referred to as the penalty phase. Because the case is a death penalty case, the jury, or again the judge if the trial is a bench trial, has to decide if the defendant is to be sentenced to death or if they should be given life in prison without the possibility of parole. The jury will have to come up with a unanimous decision, so if even one juror votes not to sentence the defendant to death, then he must be sentenced to life without parole. One of the biggest challenges this case will have is finding an impartial jury. With the amount of publicity this case has received, it will be nearly impossible to find a jury that hasn't already developed an opinion about the shooter. If the jury member opposes the death penalty, they will automatically be stricken and not given a chance to serve on the jury. The jury process could take weeks, if not months. On July 18, 2019, the judge ruled that Frank was allowed to waive his appearance at the hearings which took place before the trial. Frank's defense team argued that most of these hearings were only procedural, and his presence wouldn't be needed. The judge asked Frank if he understood that there were certain details that he could miss by not attending these hearings, and Frank responded that he understood fully.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Active Shooter, the podcast. Remember, if you see something, say something. There's no telling how many lives you may be saving.
A huge thank you to Darren Curtis, who composed some of the music used in this episode. Check him out at darrencurtismusic.com. DARRENCURTIS music.com.
Active shooter, reports of an active shooter
mass casualty incidents.
Make sure to check us out on social media. We have a discussion group on Facebook. Just search for Active Shooter, the podcast discussion group. You can also find us on Instagram at Active the Podcast and Twitter at Podcast Active. For just $1 a month, you can get access to ad-free episodes, early release episodes when available, and a shout-out on the show. Just go to patreon.com/Active the Podcast. Thank you, and be safe.
Hey there, Rainbow Warriors. It's me, CJ, host of Beyond the Rainbow, True Crimes of the LGBT. I have sprinkled myself with protective glitter and jumped upon my trusty unicorn to bring stories of the LGBTQI. Whether you belong to this community or not, I welcome you to take a listen to Beyond the Rainbow. I have all sorts of crazy, chilling, and horrifying stories I tell. It's available almost everywhere you listen to podcasts. Still not sure I'm worth a listen? Then check out my website at beyondtherainbowpodcast.com. And remember, it's not a crime to be gay. Unless you're a murderer.